I'm a big fan of the play of the Georgian Grandmaster Bahadur Jobava. He won the gold medal on board 1 at the Baku Olympiad in 2016. And he's such a creative player. He's capable of beating anyone in the world. Sometimes he has disasters as well, but that can happen when you're trying to create something, when you're trying to play interesting chess. And he plays elegant chess and has a real sense of beauty. And, well, I'm sure if you're a follower of the channel, then you'll have seen some of his games on the channel that I featured before from the Olympiad, but also we looked at a game from the the Qatar Blitz and Rapid Play World Championships, where he won a spectacular game there. I featured that. So I like to keep tabs on his play, and I noticed a game recently that he played in the Catalan Team Championships. And, well, this is extraordinary. Just look what happens. This is played at the end of January, and he's playing, Jobava is playing against Lopez Martinez, who's a Grandmaster. Watch what he does to a Grandmaster. Watch what happens. So d4 from Jobava. And he goes back into a French defence. So now we have a winner on the board. And of course the main line here is e5. But Bahadur likes to play slightly offbeat systems, or sometimes completely new systems. But okay, today he does something a little bit offbeat. This move, knight e2, was played famously by Alekhine on a few occasions. He defeated Nimzovich in just 19 moves in Bled 1931. It was one of, well, in those early years in the 1930s, Alekhine was probably at his peak. It's not such a silly move, knight e2. And, well, it was thought to be fairly innocuous, but actually there have been some interesting ideas recently which show that, well, black has to be a little bit careful. And this game proves that. So black takes on e4. Obviously the idea of knight e2 is to prevent the pawns being doubled. And a3. Now, that game I mentioned, Alekhine against Nimzovich, went bishop takes c3. Nimzovich protected the pawn with f5, and now this turns into a gambit. But this is very promising for white. I've had this kind of position. I used to play knight e2 occasionally. This is very promising because of all these dark squares, and there's no dark squared bishop to cover those squares, and this is extremely dangerous for black when this pawn is advanced, and this pawn is potentially weak as well. So that gives white very good compensation. Let's go back to this position. Generally, black plays bishop e7 here, and this is the recommended move. So now white recovers the pawn, and we have a pawn structure which is very familiar to French defense players from the Rubinstein or Bern variation, where black takes on e4 on the third or fourth move. The only thing is, white's knight, you could argue, is perhaps not that well placed on e2. Of course, it would be better on f3, and then we'd have a very normal position. So because it takes white time to reorganize his pieces, that's why black should be okay here. But let's take a look. There are a few wrinkles in this position. So knight f6. Now there's a famous game from Moscow 35 where Lasker beat Capablanca using this move, knight c3. But actually Capablanca played inaccurately, and I mean Lasker won a superb game. But here the problem is this pawn is actually a little bit vulnerable, and it's possible to attack this very quickly with knight c6. If one's going to support the knight, I think it's better to play knight here, and that means this pawn can be supported if necessary with c3. Alekhine actually won a game with this, like this, and he got a very nice position, actually. But black is playing too passively here with c6. For example, in this position, instead of c6, it's much better to play knight d7. And then to break out with c5. You can see that, you know, white has simply made too many moves with his knights, and black is ready to strike in the centre with c5 and should be fine. So let's come back to the game position. I should mention also that queen d3 has been played quite a few times in this position. This was caused a revival in this variation, but also not terribly good. Knight c6 is probably a good continuation here. Back to the game. Jobava took on f6. Well, I think the advantage of doing this is that you don't lose time. And then he played bishop e3. So, you know, white is fighting back in terms of speed of development. So the point of playing bishop e3 is obviously so that he can now move the knight away, having protected this pawn. And you never know, it might be possible to play queen d2 and castle's queenside, but let's see. The Indian player Negi actually played this against Giri a few years ago, and he beat Giri with this, and then castle's queenside and knight f4, and well, he achieved a very nice position. So, you know, Giri came unstuck with black in this position. So there's something to be recommended here for white's system. But instead of that, Jobava's opponent played b6. Knight f4. Bishop going to b7. And now queen g4. I think the problem with bishop b7 is it leaves this diagonal slightly weaker, but also obviously the e6 point as well. And white, you know, is already very aggressively placed. There might even be possibilities to play knight h5 sometimes. Probably black should play knight d7 here and try to escape to the queen side very quickly. But instead, black was kind of played very carefully with g6, wanting to prevent knight h5. But now white has a big advantage in development. Check. Now, if the knight goes to d7, you can take on e6, and that wins a pawn. Obviously, queen e7, bishop takes, knight check. Well, it's actually 2-pawn advantage. So black interposed with the pawn, but of course that blocks out this one and also leaves this diagonal a little bit open. We'll see that's important in a moment. Queen d6. As we'll see, it would have been better to play queen e7, but black's position is already a little bit dubious. Castle's queenside. Well, what a transformation. A few moves ago, it seemed that white was lagging in development. Now all his forces, well, practically all his forces are in play. Knight d7, and now things go from bad to worse because it's kind of inviting to sacrifice here, isn't it? Bishop takes probably not so good, and black might escape. I mean, there are knight g5 checks, still chance for an attack, but that's not so convincing. But knight takes e6 is very, very powerful. That got taken. I suspect it was this next move that black had underestimated. Simply bishop f4. Queen has to go back. And now instead of taking on e6, rook e1. A very simple move. I think it was these moves that black had underestimated. So that one's under fire. Rook takes, pawn threatened. If knight goes back, then bishop e6. The king is not going to escape. I mean, this is absolutely desperate. King d8, d5. This is not a lot of fun for the king. So in this position, after rook e1, black castled queenside. And now rook takes pawn. The queen had to go back. And after white's next move, black resigned. Rook takes c6. And that was the end of the game. Incredible. 18 moves. Just 18 moves Jobava won in. So, okay, let's just fill in the details. If bishop takes, then check. And now, a very familiar theme, not too difficult. Queen f3 is a winning move. Obviously, if that's taken, then queen c6 is mate. And if we go back here, black can escape for a couple of moves with rook e8, but it's pretty dire. Now, white's a rook down, but don't panic. Let's play here. Threaten mate. And if the queen protects, then bishop d6 prevents the black king escaping, and then on the next turn we'll play queen c7 and mate. It's going to be mate very shortly. There we are. What a game. 18 moves. So Jobava strikes again. He has an uncanny ability to make strong players look very, very weak. But that system with black is certainly worth investigating. That system for white, I'm talking about knight e2, is worth investigating. It's, I think, particularly for winner players that like these kind of closed positions very much and feel very safe with that kind of structure as black, then this kind of system with knight e2, which sort of guarantees a more open game, sometimes isn't really, that's not really what they're going for. So Jobava, that his results with this and also in the recent Aeroflot Open of 6 out of 9 brings him to number 39 in the world, and he's climbed above 2700 again. So we look forward to seeing his future battles.